Welcome to Train Signal. You're watching the lab setup video for DNS in Server 2003. In this video, we're going to take a look at our Server 2003 environment and make sure that you're comfortable so you know what the environment looks like going forward into Labs 1 and 2 of this DNS Server 2003 update. Now first, let's take a look at our physical diagram just to give you a feel for what we have set up here. Currently, we're sitting on this machine right here, XP1. Okay, and the XP1 IP address is 192.168.1.1 with a 24-bit subnet mask 255.255.255.0. Notice the default gateway. Okay, currently the default gateway is pointing out, so we're going across our Ethernet network here through our firewall. Don't worry about what we're running here. That's unimportant to what we're doing. But we are able to connect out to the internet. Okay, so from this machine right here, we can connect out through the internet through this XP1 machine. We're also going to be working with two different servers. Both of these will be running Windows Server 2003. They're going to be named Server 1 and Server 2. Okay, and if you notice the IP address is Server 1's IP address 192.168.1.100. Okay, Server 1 and 100, and then Server 2 192.168.1.200. All these machines have the same subnet mask and the same default gateway, so we just have a very basic small little network. And our goal for Labs 1 and Lab 2 will be really to get a feel for how DNS works in Server 2003 and just make sure that you have a good comfort level so when you go to configure this, you'll be familiar with all the different options. Okay, now in this video what we want to do, let's take a look at our environment. So when we're going along through the different sections, you'll be very comfortable with each different screen you see. Currently right now we're sitting on a Windows XP Professional machine. Okay, and you can see up here we've named this machine XP1. That's the name of this machine we're sitting on. This will be our base system. This is where all the recording takes place. This is where we're going to connect over to our other servers. So we'll always end up back at this machine. And you can tell this machine because of this Train Signal logo here and the man staring off into the computer. This machine's always reserved as our base system. Now we're also going to be working with those other two servers, Server 1 and Server 2. And we're going to connect over to these machines using remote desktop. Okay, so we're going to form a remote desktop connection. First, let's connect over to Server 1. Okay, in Server 1, we'll just click Connect. And we're using a net BIOS name of Server 1, but we could also use the IP address that would work just as well, 192.168.1.100. And we've got it set up to log on automatically, so you see that we've logged on here to Server 1. We're running Windows Server 2003 Enterprise Edition. This is an evaluation copy, okay? And you can do the same thing on your own network if you're going to set this up yourself. You can just run evaluation copies when you're testing this stuff out. Okay, first thing we'll do, let's go take a look at the IP settings here just to make sure that you've got a good comfort level of what we have configured. So I'm going to right-click, go to Properties, and just like the picture shows here, you'll see the IP address is set up at 192.168.1.100, 255.255.255.0 is the mask, and our default gateway is pointing out to that firewall to connect us out to the internet. These settings are critical, okay, and these are going to change or not change no matter what we do with DNS. These have to remain the same. This gateway is not going to change no matter what we do, with any of our name resolution settings. Now currently, this is pointing to an ISP DNS server. Okay, and we don't have any DNS at all running on this network. We really just have three systems just set up here randomly, and they each have their own preferred DNS server setting. Okay, and this is how you might set up your DNS at home if you just had a client machine. Let's say you've got your own XP machine sitting there, and you don't have a DNS server there on your local network. Okay, so the only way to get DNS services is to connect out to the internet. Now, is DNS required on your local network? Well, if you got a simple setup, maybe you have a home network with one or two systems on it, or even a small workgroup environment. You may set up a network for a small dentist office or doctor's office, and they may not require an Active Directory domain like we're going to go into later on in this series. Okay, and if that's the case, you really don't need a DNS server on your local network, and you may have similar settings to what you see right here. Okay, so we're going to leave this as is right now, and we will change this in a little bit once we've reconfigured these machines to act as DNS servers. Okay, so we're going to cancel out of this, cancel this, and we'll do a couple more things here just to verify what settings we have. If I right-click here, this is normally my computer, by the way. We've renamed this. I'll show you that in a second. But if we take a look at the computer name, you can see currently this computer is server 1. It's in a work group called work group. It's not part of a domain at this point right now. And I have enabled remote desktop connection. The only way we can connect over to this machine is to have remote desktop connection enabled as we do right here. Okay, so if you wanted to set this up in a similar environment, you'd have to do this as well. If you're confused as to how you might do this, take a look at a remote desktop connection video that's also included on the CD. Okay, the last thing we've really done on these machines, we've renamed the actual My Computer icon to Server 1. So literally just right-click, rename, and you can rename this to anything you want. And you know, we've done this just for simplicity. When we come over to this machine, it'll be easier for you to tell that it's Server 1 just by looking at the name up here. Okay, so Server 1, blue desktop here, blue desktop background. We'll try to really differentiate so you get a feel for what machine we're connected to. So we're going to minimize here. And now we're going to connect over to Server 2. Okay, so I've got Server 2 specified. I click Connect, and the same thing is configured where we'll log on automatically. And right away you can see here that from Server 2, we're going to have a black background. The My Computer icon, when it comes up, you'll see is going to be up here, and it's also going to be renamed to Server 2. Okay, and now let's take a look at our network settings. Okay. This machine happens to have 2 network cards. I do encourage you, if you have the same situation, disable the second network card. We do not need 2 network cards for this particular exercise. So it's just right click and disable would be here, like here if I wanted to disable this network card. Okay, we don't want to though, so let's take a look at the properties here and get a feel for what the IP address is in this system. 192.168.1.200. A 24-bit subnet mask, 255.255.255.0, same default gateway we saw in the configuration diagram, and once again we have a DNS server address configured that points out to our ISP's DNS server address, 207.69.188.187. Okay, and these settings are successful, they're working right now, so we're just going to go ahead and close this out, and this machine's running the exact same operating system as the other machine, Server 1, Server 2003 Enterprise Edition, and it's an evaluation copy. Okay, we have updated these machines with all the current security fixes, hot fixes, updates, so that's something that you may want to add as well, although DNS is a pretty basic component, and that's something that you really will have little problems with even if you did not have fully updated machines. Okay, so we're going to disconnect here, connect back over to this machine, and just to verify, we might not have realized this, but we did the exact same thing here. XP1, renamed it, and then our IP address settings here once again are going to be 192.168.1.1 as we showed in the diagram, and this information down below is all the same. Okay, now this preferred DNS server setting, we can ignore this for right now. We will be changing this, but this was different. We were demonstrating something in our DNS concepts video, and we had this pointed out to a different DNS server. Okay, in a small home-based network, okay, we'd have the same thing configured. I'd have my ISP's DNS server configured here, and in my case, it's 207.69.188.187. Okay, and this, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, this is something that you either would be provided with by the ISP. They would actually give you this IP address, or in some cases at home, you literally connect out to the internet and you dynamically obtain an IP address automatically. And if that were the case, you'd also get your DNS server settings automatically as well, so this might not be something that you even have to bother with setting in that small environment situation that we were talking about before. Okay, and just to show you right now, this machine really should be able to connect out to the internet at this point. All the TCP/IP settings are in place, and the DNS setting that I was talking of is pointing out to a public DNS server. Okay, and here you see right here we've got our election 2004 stuff here on MSN, and this is all current. Okay, let's do one more thing here. What I'd like to do, just to verify that everything's working correctly, we can ping over to our different servers. Okay, always a good idea. In our case here, it's a real good idea this is going to be set up correctly just because we have our remote desktop connections that worked without any problem. So that indicates to us pinging is probably not even necessary, but in your own home network you may not be using remote desktop. So I would recommend that before you do any of the other settings, make sure your TCP/IP connectivity is all in place. Okay, this is something that I want to make sure I hammer home to you throughout this video session, but you have to have TCP/IP up and functioning before we can even worry about DNS. Okay, DNS is a name service that relies upon TCP/IP being functional, the IP addressing scheme being functional. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and ping over to our servers. Okay, server 1 at 100. We see we do get a reply here. If you want to ping using a computer name instead, we can do that, of course, too. Okay, like this. And you can see that it resolves server 1 down to an IP address, and the pinging is successful, just like we saw before. And then we'll ping server 2, and we can do the same thing, either by NetBIOS computer name, or we could do it by the IP address as well. Okay, and I do recommend that when you're first testing this out, let's worry about the IP address settings first and foremost. You may have a situation in your network where you try pinging one way, you ping using server 2, and that doesn't work, but it does work when you use an IP address, okay, and that does indicate a name resolution issue. Okay, so to make sure your IP settings are in place, just make sure you're pinging with IP addresses first and not necessarily names. Okay, so that basically then, oops, wrong machine here, that basically then is what we have right here. As we were showing before, here's the XP machine, server 1, server 2. These three machines right now are just plugged into a switch here locally, just got a basic switch, cheapo switch. Okay, and then we have our ISA server here, okay, our firewall, and you could be running a like a Linksys all-in-one internet gateway type device that would be plugged in here to that hub or switch as well. Okay, and that forms our network. This public DNS server, that's that 207.69.188.187 DNS server address that we configured on each of our three different machines here as well. Okay, that wraps up our lab setup video. Pretty basic setup, but we got it set up, configured, all set to go. So we'll see you back here real soon, and we'll get started on lab 1.